Hello and welcome to another People and Dancefloors Cairo podcast, where we are continuing our explorations into the underground music scene in this city, thinking in particular about genres orbiting jungle, grime, dub, those kinds of things. I am joined, as usual, by the original lovely man. It's music journalist Yusha Charles.
Hello there, guys. Back again.
And today we're going to be talking to someone who I saw for the first time a couple of weeks back, and it was absolutely banging. It was DJ, producer, and events organizer Yaseen El Azzouni, aka Azzouni. Thank you for joining us, man.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, like I said, I first saw you a couple of weeks back. Can you remember where that was? That particular party?
Was it Jelly Zone or which one was it?
Yeah,
Was it,
yeah. So I think that was just about 4 weeks ago. So this podcast has been a long time coming, I think.
Yeah, been in the works. My bad. We tried to schedule this in a couple times, but I just kind of got sucked into a wormhole. But happy to be out of it, and here we go.
Good stuff. So for last week's episode, we spoke to Zuli, and he spoke to us in some depth about Vent, which for those of you that haven't listened to episode 3 of the podcast, was the first and since then only underground music scene that has existed in Cairo. And am I right in thinking that you played there for the first time, Azzouni, at the tender age of 16?
Yeah. Vent was the, as you said, first and last of its kind of an underground venue that was sort of for the music scene, by the music scene, run by participants and musicians in it. As far as my history in the matter goes, and yeah, I did perform there at the very tender age of I think I was like 16, 17. And God bless Zuli and Asim and Busain and the rest of the Vent crew for letting a 17-year-old into the club at that age, which isn't something that happens in Egypt. Like, we don't really have underage clubs here, or like, youth attendance. But very much impacted, I think, the course of my own artistry and music, as well as my approach to this whole, call it abstractly community building, events organization and such, which I'm sure we'll get into as we go along.
It's interesting as well because there aren't many spaces, I think, anywhere, but much less in Cairo, that would offer youngsters such as yourself the chance to be able to do that and thereby kind of kickstart their interest or their career on that level, do you think?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I still keep second guessing myself, trying to figure out, like, what was it about the music I was making at the time that they were like, oh yeah, let's give this kid a gig, and trying to get all that imposter syndrome out of the way. But they heard something that they fucked with, and they're like, yo, let's bring this kid in. And I played that first gig, and from that point onwards, the bouncers just knew me. The homies they had working the door knew me. I was in there as often as I can, heading out and coming back before curfew, and kind of just the like awkward kid in the corner, like still not able to express oneself on the dance floor, but just in the corner, like very much watching the live acts and watching the DJs, like, oh yeah, this is cool, this is fun, there's people dancing, haha, I can have a beer, nice.
So was that was a totally new experience for you at that point?
No, for sure. I still have videos of the first time I set foot in that venue. There was Ismail blasting a techno set with the KIK, Cairo's Coming, which used to be their collective, their logo flashing in epileptic, blue and red on the screen. For reference, KIK was a music collective with Zuli, Asim Tag, Busaina, Nader, Hussein Sherbini, and Ismail, in multiple combinations and subgroups within it, and different bands and different projects. But they were, sort of the people I looked up to. I'm like their age now when we first, I'm now their age when we first met. But that was sort of the crew that was like going out, pushing some just like weird beats and weird music and touring, and then they had their own venue. Like, it was and kind of is still goals in a sense. But yeah.
So how did you get into that crowd? Was it through hearing the music online and then just wanting to kind of be a part of the scene, or what made you want to kind of go to Vent and play Vent? Was it through friendships or through various different aspects?
One sec, I'm gonna take off this jacket.
No worries.
What's your mic, mate?
Yeah. Well, Well, yeah, I didn't exactly know what Vent was before performing there. So like the way I got into it, I was in like a middle school, going on a high school band, playing bass guitar. The band was only really interested in playing Green Day covers, which is like cool for the first 50 times you do it, but then, you kind of get tired of hearing playing Holiday. And then, this homie of mine from school was like, yo, I found this music production course. I'm going to take it. Do you want to go with me? And I'd been making beats since like 14-ish, but very much on a like, I want to sound like Skrillex, open up a YouTube tutorial, how to sound like Skrillex, they open it up and it doesn't really like teach you what you're doing. You're just sort of following instructions of like, oh yeah, turn the synthesizer to this, make this octave, this detune, route it this way, and you're gonna get a growl bass like Skrillex. But it wasn't really teaching me like, well, one, how do these things happen, and then like pushing me in a direction to like do something original with my work. So yeah, I did the production course, which is at Epic 101 Studios, which is honestly, still to this day, I think one of the best resources Egypt's music scene has had. Like the number of people who've passed through that place's doors. Shouts to the founder, KIK members, Hussein Sherbini and Ismail Hosni, and then as well as Shiha, who's like, yeah, the impact these three men have had on the music scene. Like there are so many names of people who've passed through those doors and done a production course or a mixing course or live visuals. It was a very essential like educational hub for new music or VJing technology that a lot of places weren't doing in Egypt. And yeah, so I went and I did the course. I didn't manage to finish the course because I had my GCSEs around the time of the course where they were teaching like mixing and mastering, which is why all my mixes still sound like ass to this day. And they told me, come back and finish the course, yo. And I'm like, yeah, eventually. It's been like 6 years or something, 7 years. But yeah, so I did the course with those guys, and at the end of the course, you came out with like a cute little EP, and Hussein was like, yo, send your EP to Zuli. Or like, no, he was like, send this to a friend of mine who's running a venue. So like, on the email, I send it to him. He's like, oh, yo, this is pretty cool. Come through next Tuesday for let's talk about giving you a gig. So I just pulled up, gone through those doors. I meet Zuli, I meet the whole crew. There's this, my first viewing of, you can call it like a nightclub style venue where it's like loud music, it's dark, there's people dancing. I'd never been exposed to anything like that, I think, before. Mainly like, you'd go to like more traditional like concerts in Egypt, which are like outdoors, the Azhar Park, Sa'it al-Sawi, bit more presentable, usually seated, so being in a space where it's like, oh no, dancing is encouraged here, just a huge shock, honestly. And yeah, we talked, and like the EP is like, okay, we're gonna get you and another graduate from the music production course to do a set. Can't remember what date this was. I'll pull up the date at some point. This was like 2014, 2015.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then did the show. They liked it for some reason. That show was strangely packed. I think back at the time of the Vent days, there used to be a big encouragement from, say, more established heads in the music scene to go show up and support someone brand new and fresh. So the room was packed with people who were way older than me. And from that point onwards, I was in. I could pull up at any time I want. Bouncer wouldn't give me shit. Just pull up and listen. I ended up doing another performance there, as well as I did a talk on my music production workflow, which was really cool. I think being able to sort of get nerdy about your production style and like explain it to a group of people and have them ask you questions and challenge you about the things that you're doing.
Yeah,
I think was really fun.
at such a young age as well. It must have been really like cool just to get into that and have that kind of a response from people and really make you want to keep going back and just continuing in that line of work.
Yeah, man. Like the place was cool, and there was this sort of friendly competition vibe with it, where it's like you'd show up one week to see like, oh yo, who are these new fresh faces? There was people would see things happen and be like, oh wait, I can do that, and I'm gonna up it next time. And there was like this turnover and a desire to be in Vent as a space. And I didn't get to attend many of them, but many of their sort of non-musical events, but they'd host talks like the one I did, film screenings, trivia nights. Like it was a full art space, as well as like that I think was financially sustained by its nightclub aspect, but it functioned as a community space for what was then becoming Egypt's underground scene. Because like at that point in time, I think there weren't that many different groups making music, and a lot of people from that era as well have kind of disappeared off the map or changed their stage names or changed careers even. But it was really just like a good hub for, you had like the band peeps in there, you had some of the rap peeps in there, all the weird electronic, deconstructed club peeps in there. The people would show up irrespective of what the genre that was going on was. On the weekends they had more commercial style music, house, minimal type stuff, which I assume was, to keep the doors open because a lot of these other genres don't make money. But yeah.
Speaking of the genres not making money, the kinds of jungle and grime and whatnot that a lot of people are into out here still seem very niche and don't necessarily seem as profitable as you say as the minimal house and the technos and stuff like that. Is that still the case, or has the scene changed in some way since that time? Has it become less niche and more market valuable in that respect?
Mm, well, I'm inclined to say yes. I honestly don't recall whether those styles specifically were that prevalent during the Vent days. I'm sure all kinds of different music was played there. But I think in the post-Vent period, where there was kind of a bit of a dispersal of the music scene, the only the momentum in, call it, the experimental or niche genres underground was carried on much due to the work of Jelly Zone and Dunya. And then,
for our listeners that don't know and haven't listened to the previous episodes, Jelly Zone is a crew that put on rave nights.
Yeah, let's bring this back. So it kind of goes back to my theory of how Vent was, in many ways, the starting point for a lot of what we now call, like, quote unquote, the underground scene here in Egypt. And as a result of Vent and all of the things that Yaseen just mentioned, you did get things like Jelly Zone, which came out of this, which is mainly, along with a lot of other people as well, but Donya very much sitting at the top of this, organizing events and doing this very much consistently from its conception all the way up until the present day. And they're one of the most, in the post-Vent times, one of the most long-running and, we can say successful underground nights that happen here in Cairo.
yeah, and Jelly Zone, I think by design, is extremely multi-genre. Like, Dunya goes in with sort of a plan that you won't fully understand until the night's over, but you'll get rap, maharaganat, weird club music, sometimes more standard dancey club music, just a whole range of different, just you can call them quote-unquote underground genres. We're going to be using a lot of words like underground or scene or niche, but like it's important to realize that that's what the majority of these genres, like that's what they are in Egypt. We are not a commercial force quite yet. Perhaps will not be, but we're still in that very formative era.
We're working towards it.
Working on it, yeah.
And there have been at least a couple of compilation albums that have kind of arisen out of that whole time and place. I mean, around Vents and in terms of the Irsh crowd and stuff like that. I've seen volumes 1 and 2 come out of that, so that there is a place that people can go to listen to at least the musical history of this particular movement in this particular place.
Well, yes and no. So like Irsh, which is an offshoot project of some of the Vent peeps, you'll find a lot of the same people who were performing during that era, but there is a severe lack of documentation as well as access to a lot of the music that came out during that period. The vast majority of it is on SoundCloud because we were all, that was like peak SoundCloud days, 2013 through 2015. There used to be a couple different music platforms, many of whom have shut down, one of which was Dendin, Dendin.me, which I was quite sad to see die last year. That was a great archive of music from that early period. It was like the first attempt at a Middle Eastern or North African SoundCloud substitute, let's say. But yeah. So post-Vent, a lot of the momentum for these underground genres was carried on by Jelly Zone, and then, at least in the way I like to see it, MOSHTRQ, when we formalized and started throwing a monthly night at Cairo Jazz.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that at some point as well. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, for sure. When we started doing a monthly, I think it showed simultaneously from a market perspective as well as from an audience perspective that there is sort of space and demand for this music on a regular basis beyond, say, and this is an extremely valid model, but like beyond, say, the Jelly Zone model, which is like we're going to throw one large event every couple months, compared to smaller scale things on a more frequent basis. So I think one of the things MOSHTRQ sort of affirmed was that there was a demand for this kind of music, not even being specifically like, let's say there was a demand for non-commercial electronic music in Egypt, as well as like a growing crowd for it, and a generation of like college kids, university kids who had over the course of the pandemic discovered that like, hey, wait, there's a whole bunch of music out there other than just like melodic and house and whatever, and like those genres are valid in their own right, but like I think a lot of people had that sort of introspection and exploration happen during the pandemic. So you know, yeah. And then I think since then, there have been a lot of crews who have seen the successes and seen the way that like Jelly Zone and MOSHTRQ and Vent used to operate in the past, and begun sort of starting their own crews. And it makes me happy to see like a bunch of young musicians, like take for example Special Project, spearheaded by Hisham and a bunch of the peeps. Like it makes me happy to see a newer generation sort of come up and be like, oh, yo, we can do this as well. What is a collective? Okay, we're gonna start all the social media pages, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, start putting out music, releasing things, recording. I think for a while there was this perception that like it's difficult to do these things, and in a lot of ways it is, but it kind of just starts with like coming up with a name, grabbing a bunch of homies together, and throwing a night, and then doing a second, and doing a third, and doing a fourth, and as long as you can sustain it, you know.
So getting around the whole gatekeeper aspect of it, then was that your incentive with MOSHTRQ when you started that, and how did that come about?
Okay, well, first, explain to me what you mean by the gatekeeper aspect, because I know we talked about this a bit before we started recording. Like, expand upon that a little bit, and then I'll tell you the backstory.
Well, you mentioned that to some extent, the people that are running events and parties like MOSHTRQ and like Jelly Zone are in some ways almost becoming the kind of gatekeepers of this particular subculture, like themselves, just by virtue of DIY building it in a sense. But obviously, when we think about cultural gatekeepers, we're talking about much more established forms of music and particular figureheads that say what's good and what isn't, what qualifies and what doesn't. Were you trying to get around those particular figureheads and particular genres in Cairo, which is what made you want to start MOSHTRQ, or was there some other incentive for doing that?
Mm. Well, I can't speak on being gatekeepers of the culture. I think usually these things are determined by the crowd,
Sure.
but we'll get into that a little bit because we talked a bit previously. But for sure, in the music establishment in Egypt, as it stood and probably still does to this day, you need to kiss someone's ass if you want a gig. I just gotta be honest about it. Like in the majority of established party series, crews, festivals, like if you're a local artist and you're not their friend, the chances of you getting a gig are pretty slim. Like, and there was a sort of a ceiling that myself and all the people in MOSHTRQ, and I'm sure Donia with Jelly Zone felt at some point, was like that there was a limit to what one can do as a solo artist in Egypt. Like, I could conceivably play every single party series in the country within the span of the month, and then what happens next? And I feel like a lot of those lines were drawn along genre boundaries. Like the biggest festivals in the country aren't really encouraging to non-commercial genres. We can put it that way. And it mainly sprung from a desire of like wanting to do our own thing. At least for me, like I'm not the sole founder of MOSHTRQ. We're a crew of eight peeps who've known each other for decades at this point. And it kind of happened organically, at least for my own progression. Like, to give you a bit of backstory, so like very formative time, me being involved with Vent. I left to go to university in the States in 2015, and then shortly after I left, Vent shut down. So suddenly it's like, whoa, where's my community? I was kind of very disenfranchised going into the music scene in the States, because like in Cairo it's a small crew. Like there's 1 degree of separation between me and the top people in the country, like pop stars. It's a very small musical community and a relatively unsaturated market compared to a similarly large city like New York or Berlin or London, with a similar population size. So I'm just in the States, in the Bay Area. I was studying political science at UC Berkeley, just like a drop in an ocean of musicians. And I did a bit of a genre tour while I was there. I think I started off in like a hip hop space, with a bunch of different crews, but then I didn't really like how hip hop treats music producers, kind of very consumably and interchangeably. Uh, so I left that. The closest analog I could find to the Vent music scene, which was this kind of experimental spaces, were incredibly pretentious and not welcoming. To just a bunch of old heads, jerking each other off over their fucking modular systems, and that didn't really vibe with me.
To put it politely.
To put it politely. And I'd settled into, when I was there, like I joined a music magazine called the Berkeley B-Side. I was on their editorial and then marketing and then eventually editor-in-chief. Shout out the B-Side. I don't know why they blocked me on Instagram, but let's go.
Probably because you say something like old heads wanking each other off over their modular systems.
I need to watch my mouth, honestly. But while I was at the B-Side, I met a very, very dear friend of mine, Connor McCamey. And while we were at the B-Side, we kind of wanted to push doing more live music for the music magazine. So we found a local dive bar, rented out the space, to throw like a band night to celebrate the release of our print issue one semester. And the bar owner, Connor was DJing, and the bar owner at the end of the night, or the floor manager, was like, "Hey, we guys really mess with your music. What are you doing every Thursday next semester?" And we're like, "Nothing." He's like, "Do you guys want to come throw a night here?" That was White Horse Bar in Oakland. Shout out White Horse Bar, Mike. But yeah, so then we suddenly found ourselves, oh, hey, here's this space that we can throw a music night in. Let's do something with it. And there was a mutual desire to not do it as part of the music magazine, but to make it our own thing. So we got our close homie, Kirsten Chen. She designed our posters. We called the night If You Know, You Know. We'd thrown one If You Know, You Know prior to getting the White Horse Bar location. But it's like we did it, and we did it every single week. So like each week we'd print out a new poster. We had an enormous network of just like close homies, Marseille, Eric, Ray Dahlstrom, Natch, Naidu, and a bunch of other homies who, I can't list out everyone right now, but we just got together this crew where it's like we had our distribution. We had the homie who'd ride around campus, sticking our poster up wherever it could be stuck. Kirsten would do the artwork. Me and Connor would show up to the venue, do sound check, and we did that every single week. And I don't suggest a weekly format to anyone because it's incredibly exhausting creatively and physically. And you kind of realize how much crowd dynamics and like the ebb and flow, where people don't want to go to the same venue 2 weeks in a row type stuff happens. But through that endeavor, throwing that weekly club night, it opened so many doors for us because like we'd been in the States for a couple years at this point. Like Connor and I had been involved in the club scene as participants, like going out, like attendees, I mean, going out, supporting the local crews who were within our genre, showing up to their nights. But it's like we couldn't get a gig, we couldn't get any good gigs. And then it wasn't because we weren't good. It was because I think, especially in a city like San Francisco, a lot of people pass through the city, take what they want from it, and leave. And as such, the locals, and especially the local art scene, are very defensive about their turf. So it's like, here are these two kids from out of town who aren't bringing anything to the table. Why would we give them a gig? And that's totally understandable to me now. But then as soon as we got this venue location and, locked down an agreement, we do it every week, we had a budget, we could then invite the people that we'd been really messing with over the past couple of years and be like, hey, come play for us. We would like you to be here. Yeah. And through doing that, you show the local community that like, oh wait, these guys are actually here to contribute something. And so many doors opened for us in San Francisco. So I saw that model and how it led to, I guess, on a small scale, successes for us. Connor has since taken If You Know, to LA and is one of the most poppin' nightlife events happening in the city. Big shout to him for doing that.
Nice.
But yeah, so when I'd come back to visit Egypt every summer and I'd link up with the boys that would be the MOSHTRQ crew, I'd just be like, yo, guys, you need to start your own collective out here. You need to do it, band together, all of this kind of stuff. And they sometimes would be like agree and sometimes not. And we kind of get a bit bogged down in the details and end up just, going out and sitting by the beach and enjoying our summer. But then as soon as I came back in 2020, I knew that was something that we needed to do again. And after a couple gigs at Cairo Jazz Club, like separately, I'd pitched Omar Foda, who used to run or still does run curation at their Alt Tuesdays, which, for those who don't know, Alt Tuesdays is the day where Cairo Jazz puts on non-commercial genres of like dance music.
Yeah, for our English listeners, and if you're ever in Cairo, it's the best time to go to Cairo Jazz.
Yeah, there's save for like the odd Sunday or Wednesday, where there's like live music. All Tuesdays is the place to be if you go to Cairo Jazz.
Yeah, I remember going to the Alt Tuesday a few weeks ago, but not knowing that it was Alt Tuesday and walking in, and the kind of music I was hearing was reminiscent of what I was listening to in like Bristol, or what you would hear at the average Bang Face or something like that. And I was shocked, and that's when I knew that I'd kind of found something that, that echoed the scenes out there, and that did exist here, and I was sure that I wanted to kind of continue exploring it. And so that's pretty much why we're doing this right now. So
Yeah.
And then you met me, and then the rest is
then I
history.
met Yusha, codename Jackpot, in a bar in downtown Cairo, and he started taking me down the rabbit hole. So
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, we'd done a couple disconnected lineups, with Cairo Jazz, and then I kind of pitched to Omar like, hey, would you be down if we did this every month? And he's like, sure, yeah, once a month. Like the first couple events we threw, we had Post Drone, myself, Osyuti, and a bunch of the other homies, and I think it displayed the potential for this kind of music to draw a crowd, which I don't think Cairo Jazz had much success in previously. So we kind of pitched him and was like, hey, why don't we do this every month? And he's like, okay, sure. What do you want to call yourselves? And then we just went into a wormhole of like, what do we call the crew? What do we call the collective? Oh, we now need to be a collective, got the WhatsApp group going. And we settled on MOSHTRQ, and then we spent another week figuring out how we want to spell it. Is it MOSHTRQ with no vowels, or MOSHTRQ with an A at the end, or with a K? So MOSHTRQ with an A, or MOSHTRQ with a K, or MOSHTRQ with a Q, and just all of these different spellings, and we just picked one.
the important things you got to fight over that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
It's part of the creative process,
Yes.
boys.
Yeah.
Our graphic designer, Balla 3058, and Post Tawheed put together the logo. I think it was just Post Tawheed on his own at that beginning stage. Can't remember exactly, but yeah, the graphics boys put together a logo, did a poster, and through the first night, it was a big success. I think we had like 100-something people in there.
Wow.
Yeah, which for context, Cairo Jazz is not a large space. Like the original Cairo Jazz Club is small.
Yeah.
It is a cramped venue. The staff will tell you that they can fit 400 people in there, but
Yeah.
I would shudder to think of more than 150 being in there at any point in time.
Agreed.
And yeah, we did the first one, and then we threw 5 more at the Cairo Jazz Club from a range of like band nights. We did some instrumental ones, some that were more rap focused, some that were more club focused. Rounded it off with our 6th event at their Cairo Jazz Club 610 venue, which is like a larger one on another side of town. Just massive stacked lineup. I think we had, like, not counting the MOSHTRQ crew, like 8 other motherfuckers on there with us, as well as like an art gallery featuring art by local artists who'd been supporting us along the way. Among them Kafrowi, Dalila Hassanin, Weirdo. Shout out to Weirdo. Yeah, a bunch of other peeps. And we threw down. That was sort of the largest scale event we did. Didn't end in the best way. Kind of got shut down early. Not the best feeling, due to, I think, rowdy party goers, we can say.
Rowdy party goes is
Yeah,
the
y'all
correct
need to
statement
stop going into the bathroom to do lines in groups of 8. Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing. It's
There-
just like bad party.
There's at
ethic.
least an etiquette to this,
Yeah. Like I don't mind people. You consume what you want to consume, but like,
Absolutely.
you don't forget you're at a venue, dog. Like, you can't take 8 motherfuckers into a bathroom stall with you.
There's something in that though, isn't there? Because I assume that you were putting on the first MOSHTRQ gigs in non-commercial spaces. What kind of venues were you using for your first 5 gigs, and then how did you end up going into that more commercial Cairo Jazz Club kind of space?
No, it was the opposite. Like,
Yeah.
we started
Ah.
with Cairo Jazz Club because they allowed us to use the space without having to pay anything. Like, we didn't need to pay for venue rental. Everything was already there. You had the bouncers, on the venue's payroll, a bar on the venue's payroll. The venue's theirs. Sound is already there. They had Nazli Rida, who is one of the best live sound engineers in Egypt currently
Shout out
right
as
now.
well.
Shout out to Nazli. So like there was an incentive for us to go to that venue because they had everything already set up. It was safer for us. We didn't have to deal with taxes. We didn't have to deal with the syndicate asking for our membership cards. We'll talk about the musician syndicate at some point today, I think. The incentive was like there was a lot of safety afforded to us by doing things at Cairo Jazz. After we did our 6th event, we kind of all decided that we didn't really want to, at least for the time being, dive right back into doing events. So we took a hiatus over the summer. And then once the summer was over, we threw our 7th event, which was myself, Karim Sirri, Sheh from Kafr Dawar Records, who makes some honestly crazy futuristic mahraganat, techno, hybrid kind of stuff. He was playing live with Logical Daoud, one of the best new MCs, honestly, in the game in Egypt. Incredible writer.
Lyrically is amazing.
Lyrical mad lad. And closing off the night, we had Nazar from Hyperdub, who we'd been wanting to book for a long ass time. He was our first foreign booking. We put a big stake in championing local art. And at least for Nazar, he's someone who we felt a lot of resonance with musically and had been playing his stuff for a really long time, even since our first event. So we found out he was coming to Egypt and had to make it happen. And then Ashrar closing off the night. And we did that one externally to Cairo Jazz. There was a desire to do it ourselves, I think. Because like when you're doing things with a set venue, there's 2 kinds of deals they're going to offer you. They'll offer you either a fixed fee, which is what we were operating with Cairo Jazz, which is like irrespective of your attendance, you're going to get X amount of money. And you choose how that amount of money is divided. So it's like between paying our graphics people to produce the artwork and paying the artists, it wasn't the most sustainable financial model for MOSHTRQ to operate on. So we wanted to see like, okay, what happens if we take all the risk, find the venue to rent out our own sound system, do all of the shit ourselves? How's that going to turn out? We didn't make that much of a profit, but there was a satisfaction having it live and die by our own hand, you know? So I think that's kind of how we got into using more alternative spaces for our events. It was like a bit of a reverse. Like we didn't start alternative and become commercials. Like we started in established venues and then moved to, you know, off the grid kind of spaces.
I mean, and that's also kind of understandable as well with how things evolve in Cairo, or how things are in Cairo more specifically. To start off like that seems kind of like a logical progression. It's kind of like you started at the only established place that one could start at, really, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you've learnt your lessons, don't want to say learnt your lessons, but like you've been through the trials and tribulations, and then you kind of have concluded to the point where, yeah, well, actually, maybe it's not all about that, you know?
Yeah, also, I forgot, like, the 2 kinds of deals they can offer you. It's like one which is a fixed amount and one which is a door split. Sorry, I realized I didn't mention that earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cairo Jazz Club is kind of the only, you know, up and running venue. They passed their, like, what, 25th anniversary or something, you know, like last year or this year. It's definitely an establishment that allows for many different kinds of musicians an outlet to perform, and there is sort of an esteem to having performed at Cairo Jazz Club because it's the closest thing we have to an institution, musically speaking. But there's also a ceiling if you're in a niche or alternative genre. Like, in no scenario is your niche genre going to get a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, which is the weekend for us. Like, it's just not going to happen. For them, it's not financially viable. And then there's this, and you can say the same for most venues, honestly, but it's like this feedback loop where the alternative genre is not given a weekend slot. As such, it is not given room to grow, and so it doesn't grow. Because, like, you're only going to get the weirdos and kind of just like the people who are really about it coming to go listen to fucking club music, you know, and jungle and 180 beats per minute plus stuff on a Tuesday, you know? So there was definitely a ceiling to growth and to our growth doing it there. Very blessed for the opportunities that came from it. But there's a lot more power in throwing the thing yourself, despite the risks that come from not you doing it at an established venue.
Yeah, keep it DIY.
For sure.
There's a really interesting thing that you mentioned just there about a scene being given the room to grow. And I was thinking about how, I mean, you mentioned to me a little while ago about the ways in which, because of the new capital that's being built out in the desert outside of Cairo, because of the empty space that exists in actual existing Cairo as a result of that, that maybe some of that might be taken up by arts and cultural spaces and by rave spaces. Those are some of the things that I want to touch on in the next half of our podcast, which is going to be brought to the listeners in 7 days this week, because we're coming up on 40 minutes for this particular podcast, but we've still got so much more to say, so we might as well split it into 2 parts. What do you think?
It's the Yaseen El Azzouni 2-part special.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm
Two-part
in your ears
special.
already. You ain't gonna get rid of me that easily.
Love it.
Okay, thanks again, everyone, for listening. Come back next week for the second half of our discussion with Yaseen El Azzouni.
See you in 7 days.
See you later.